The soldiers said the UFO looked like a jack-o'-lantern as it came over the side of the mountain. It blasted a bright white light. The soldiers stood there frozen. Little did they know that their lives would change forever after this UFO incident. Welcome to the Paranormal Post. I'm Clayton Morris. On this channel, we cover unexplained mysteries, UFOs, paranormal research that will expand your consciousness, and stories that will make you cover your face with blankets at night. Dare I say, the stories that the mainstream media largely ignores, by the way. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, then please hit subscribe. We publish twice a week like clockwork. On today's show, it's no question that Earth makes up less than 1% of the universe. So please turn off this video if you think we're alone in the universe. This channel is probably not for you. In fact, the UFO debate has been put to bed now that our US government has confirmed these craft and has admitted to the recovery of materials from other worlds. But even though we know UFOs exist, and the government has confirmed it, the real question is, why are they here on Earth? What are they doing here? Well, the answer may lie in a strange wartime UFO incident. It was May 1951, 1 year into the Korean War, and Private First Class Francis Wall and his regiment found themselves stationed near Chorwan, about 60 miles north of Seoul, South Korea. Now, the team, formed of 25 soldiers, were preparing their gear and ammunition when suddenly all 25 of them saw what they described as a massive jack-o'-lantern-shaped UFO, which came wafting across the mountainside. At that moment, they all felt as if the light was physically attacking them, and it made it harder or even possible for them to move at all, frozen. As the team watched, they tried to run towards the village that they were about to bomb. Imagine feeling like the only safe place was the place that is being attacked by the US military. No thanks. But that's where they tried to run. That's where they were about to feel safest. Private Wall told the Center for UFO Studies in 1987 that, quote, "We further noticed that this object would get right into the center of an airburst of artillery and yet remain unharmed. And suddenly the object turned, and whereas at first it had glowed orange, now it was pulsating blue and green, brilliant light," he said. While all of this was happening, Wall then asked the company commander for permission to fire at the mysterious light from his M1 rifle. He was granted permission to fire, and he remembered that his bullets seemed to basically hit a metallic object. It made a dinging sound, and they bounced right off, almost like there was a force field surrounding this craft. After that, though, the object began acting more and more aggressive and bolted from side to side as its lights flashed on and off, almost like he angered the craft or something. Then suddenly Wall said that this movement made a burning, tingling sensation run all over his body. He later said that the light that was hitting him and his comrades was like getting hit with a ray gun, light that was emitted in pulses and waves. He said he could physically see the segments of light hitting him, almost like a searchlight as it swept back and forth. Once it approached him, he could feel the pain as it hit him. The team tried to get out of there fast. They rushed into underground bunkers and tried to look out through the windows to get a better understanding as to what this thing was. They watched as this UFO was hovering above them, and they tried shooting at it at a 45-degree angle, but the object dodged all of their attempts. Nothing they did managed to hit the craft. Wall said that this thing was super fast. He said it was there, and then it was gone. That's it. Gone forever. Now, that's just the first part of the story. If that wasn't crazy enough, wait until you hear what happens next. 3 days after the incident, the entire company of men was evacuated by ambulance with special roads that had to be cut into the woods to get those who were too weak to walk. When they finally received medical treatment, they were found to have dysentery, an extremely high white blood cell count, and burning sensations all over their bodies. Richard Haynes, a UFO researcher and former NASA scientist, said, as he was asked about these symptoms, he said, "To me, they sound like the effects of radiation." Throughout the Korean War and until it ended in 1953, dozens more men reported seeing similarly mysterious flying objects and intense lights. They all described the object as a flying saucer, which could travel at extraordinary speeds and withstand any gunfire or any artillery attacks. It was said that a total of 42 men saw the saucer during the 37-month war, or saucers. According to historian Paul Edwards, many researchers at the time thought the sightings were some kind of a Soviet experiment based on anti-gravity experiments made originally by Germany. Remember, this is the beginning of the Red Scare, the Cold War. More Americans were terrified of the Soviets than UFOs. Paul Edwards says that the researchers at the time thought these saucers were supposedly so large they could carry 50 tons of weight and were powered by electromagnetic propulsion. Edwards says that it was suggested at the time that they were discs that the Russians were testing over the Korean skies. But these sightings were happening well before and well after the war. Some say the sudden spike in numbers of sightings during the war was a result of exhaustion. Many of the sightings were reported by soldiers who most likely had their fair share of stress. After the accelerating numbers, the United States Air Force launched a research group by the name of Project Blue Book, went from that year, 1952, to the year 1986. It was a systemic study into the unidentified flying objects and if they would be a danger to national security. Now, when it ended, the much maligned Project Blue Book said these sightings were nothing particularly mysterious, and yet they ruled out military experiments. So what the hell were they then? They're not mysterious? What a joke. Again, that's why a lot of people believe that Project Blue Book was considered Project Whitewash. Witnesses and private investigators started picking up where the Project Blue Book left off. Among those private investigators was Richard Haynes. He was a scientist with an open mind. Rather than pursuing a certain result, he said, quote, "I don't believe in UFOs. I'm trying to let the data convince me one way or the other," which is the scientific approach. It's striking how many accounts there are of similar sightings in the Korean War and other conflicts, end quote. Haynes also disagreed with the theory that stated that every one of these unidentified flying objects that could be seen during the Cold War was a Soviet or Chinese vessel, because at the time, they didn't have the technology to prove otherwise. He said if they were, they would have been building those crafts for later use in later wars, like Vietnam, for instance. He further explains that not all sightings were identical. Like for Private Wall's case, the sightings came with a physical damage, right, that lasted years after the war to his body, and physical examples where his bullets simply ricocheted away from the craft altogether. Haynes believes the frequency of sightings, especially during the war, suggests that maybe something out there is interested in human behaviors during conflict and wanted to inspect it up close, study us, to try to understand why we would want to hurt other human beings. Great question. The new technologies that humans come up with during almost every war we fight is pretty creative and unprecedented. So, he explains, we tend to be very creative when we fight wars. If we were interested in how other countries or another race of people fought their wars, you might want to collect information on that, wouldn't you? That's one possible explanation. He says there are many others. While about 80% of all sightings turn out to be completely normal, like a human aircraft or just oddly shaped lights or oddly shaped crafts like a blimp, Wall's sighting was never conclusively proven or disproven. It makes matters even more complicated because his team did indeed tell the same story over and over again. Wall did, and everyone who was subjected to the mysterious lights fell very ill shortly after and had to be hauled out of the woods. Wall later said that his entire regiment agreed to never report what they saw that day because they were scared that their superiors would lock them up and deem them crazy and unfit to be soldiers. However, what made Wall break his silence was the lasting effects of this sighting, what it did to his body. Permanent weight loss, from 180 pounds down to 138, and he was unable to put on weight from then on. He had permanent stomach problems and a period of disorientation and memory loss after returning to the United States. When he retired at the age of 42 in 1969, and 30 years after that, his story stayed the same. That UFO and everything that happened, all of the details were consistent every time he told the story. His fellow soldiers also suffered the same physical ailments and kept their secrecy until the day they died. Private Wall became their sort of de facto spokesperson, speaking on behalf of the other 24 men. The UFO experience that Wall had that day continued to scar him both mentally and physically until the day he died in 1999. Whether it was stress or induced hallucination or a real sighting, the personality-altering trauma that Wall and his 25 soldiers in that regiment had that day remains, till this day, a mystery. If you like this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Never miss one of our videos. And share it with your friends who might be interested in extraterrestrial behaviors. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think Wall saw that day? And what do you think happened to those 25 men? Be sure to check out this other video that we just produced here on the channel. I think you're going to like it. We'll see you next time, everyone.